Good afternoon, Chris Cooper here of Studio Tissue 8. I am professional seamstress. I've been sewing all my life. One of the things that I do when I'm not doing alterations on wedding gowns and ready to wear is I teach sewing. I enjoy sharing my gift with others. That said, one of the biggest hurdles that I see when I'm teaching is my students learning how to read a pattern jacket. It is not hard, however, your first time around, even your second time around, it may be a little difficult to understand. The pattern jacket has a wealth of information on it. And one of the things that I do know is in order for you to complete a sewing project successfully, it starts with, outside of knowing how to sew, basic sewing skills, the next important thing is learning how to read the pattern and learning how to read the guide sheet and understanding all of the markings and things that are on the patterns. So today we're going to talk about how to read the pattern jacket. The next series will be on how to read the pattern pieces themselves, and then after that it will be how to cut out the pattern. So we're going to start with reading the pattern jacket. So one of the first things that you have to determine is your skill level. That is very important. If you're a beginner, then you want to start off with patterns that really give you straightforward instructions. So in my opinion, that would be like a simplicity. If you are an advanced sewer, then you probably already know how to read the pattern jacket. But in the event that you don't, you certainly don't want to use a Vogue pattern for starters. Vogue patterns are absolutely wonderful. That's mostly what I use if I use a pattern at all. But the Vogue patterns leave a lot to the imagination. It does not give you every single step. Whereas with the simplicity pattern, it pretty much gives you every single step. They are the best for beginner sewing. So I'm going to assume that I am talking to beginner sewers, and that is where I will focus my attention. So that said, how about if we start with the different types of patterns? We'll start there first. And I don't believe I have a simplicity pattern because I just really don't use them. So how about if we start with a see and sew? See and sew is really easy. And then from there, I would go with probably McCall's, this is the pattern that I'm going to be referring to today. Then I would go with a Butterick. Butterick patterns are pretty easy to understand. New Look actually is relatively easy as well. So I would put that in the category with the simplicity patterns. Berta patterns are kind of in between. It really depends on what you're making. If you are a new sewer, I probably wouldn't go with Berta. I'm pretty sure you could probably find something very similar in a simplicity pattern. These patterns are, this pattern company is kind of in between as well. It just depends on what you're making, but I would say if you're going to use this, then I would say probably this would be closer to, in my opinion, closer to a Vogue. This is a Vogue pattern. This is one of their skirt patterns, which happens to be relatively easy and straightforward. However, I would not recommend it for a new sewer. And this is also a Vogue pattern. This is one of their designer patterns. Even though this is a very straightforward, easy dress, I would not recommend it for a beginner sewing. Okay, so those are all of the pattern companies minus Simplicity. Again, if you're a new sewer, I would definitely start off with Simplicity. The truth of the matter is if you take your time and look through the pattern book, you can probably find variations of every pattern that's in all of the pattern books. So just take your time and find the one that will meet your skill level. And then that can be your challenge. As you learn more skills, then you can, change your pattern companies until you are comfortable across the board doing all of those, using all of those pattern companies. Another thing that you want to keep in mind, if your goal is to at some point sew for other people, then you want to familiarize yourself with the different pattern companies and how their guide sheets read and things of that nature. Okay, so as I said, we are going to start with this pattern. Now, I've not made this pattern. It was given to me by a client, and she actually told me, gave me the fabric and said, whatever one you think looks best on me, that's the one that I want. So my clients trust me, and I so appreciate it. So I think her personality and the fabric that she purchased, I think we're going to go with the actual version that is sewn. Now, this pattern has all of these different versions in it, and for the most part, it's the sleeve treatment and the skirt. So you can go with the cold shoulder, you can go with off the shoulder completely, you can go with a flared shoulder and a flared skirt, you can go with a straight skirt and flared sleeves. I mean, there's an array of versions that you can select from. So these are my favorite kind of patterns. If I'm going to have a pattern or purchase a pattern, this is my favorite kind of pattern, where there's different variations of the outfit, and I can pick and choose whatever I want to do. Okay, so we're going to go with the version pictured, and I believe that is the, let's see here. That is the straight skirt version with the off the shoulders. Okay, so one of the things that is important, there's a lot of things that are important, but one of the most important things are measurements. You have to have the correct measurements, hands down. Even though you do fittings, measurements are important because you want to make sure that you're, one, have the correct size for the client, two, you're not wasting fabric, and three, that when you're doing your fittings, you don't have a whole lot to do. You just want to make sure that you have the client's measurements. Or if you're sewing for yourself, you want to make sure that you have your measurements. How many of you know that your store size and your actual measurements are different? So for me, I'm a size 10, and a pattern, I'm a 12 or a 14. Hands down, it has never been any different. I just don't know, what to say. It never fails me. So when I'm sewing for myself, I always make sure that I have, that I cut size 12 or 14 pattern. It's always easier to come down. But if you cut too small, then you really don't have anywhere to go. So to be on the safe side, always go up a size, and then you can always alter down to fit you perfectly. And that stands for clients as well. If your clients are between sizes, which most patterns have different sizes in them, but if you have her measurements or his measurements, you will be able to make a decision as to what size pattern you should be using. Do not sew without measurements. You just don't do it. I mean, you're wasting resources, energy, time. It just never works. Always use measurements, and always have fittings. If you're sewing for clients and you're not doing fittings, you are doing yourself a great disservice. When you're sewing for yourself, you can kind of, play around with it or whatever. But always, if you're sewing for clients, make sure that you have their measurements, make sure that you're doing fittings. And those things will pretty much guarantee that your client will be happy with the end results of the product, okay? So, as I stated before, the back of the pattern has a wealth of information, and I actually made a bigger copy, and I don't know if this is better, but this is a bigger copy of what is on the back of the pattern. So I'm just going to point out a few things that really make a difference. Like I said, the back of the pattern jacket has tons of information on it. So the first thing you want to start with are the measurements. And I don't know if you can see that. I'll hold that up like that. The first thing you want to start with are the measurements. So as I stated, I am a size 10 in the store, and I wear a size 12 in patterns. So if I'm looking at this, I'm going to go with the size 12. So I'll mark it so you can see it. So I'm going to go with the size 12. And if you see that, you can see the measurements. You can see the measurements for the size 12. I've highlighted them all the way down. So you definitely want to make sure you pay attention to that. And if any of the measurements don't add up or aren't the same as yours, you can make adjustments on the pattern. However, I would recommend that if you are a new sewer, you may not necessarily want to do that. You may just want to wait until you actually begin sewing the project, and then you can make your adjustments as you go along. As long as it's not more than, I would say, a size, then I would recommend that that's the way that you do it. And if you have a good friend, have them come over and help you pin it so you can get it to fit properly. That's always fun. Okay, so we're going to go back to the back of the jacket, and this is a larger version of it. I don't want to confuse anybody. This is the same information as is on the back of here is here. I've just enlarged it so so you can see it, and so I can see it actually. Okay, so that's the back of the jacket. Also, before I start there, I almost forgot. The guide sheet, it's 3 guide sheets in here, but this guide sheet is in there as well, and it shows you all the different versions of the different versions of the dress, the sleeves, the bodice, and the skirt. So if you're having a hard time understanding it on the back of the pattern jacket, just look at the guide sheets. And I always pull guide sheets out at the store. It's okay. You just fold it back the way that you found it and put it back in there. Sometimes that is the only way that you can understand exactly how it's made. I'm big on construction. I like to see how it's being constructed before I purchase it. Okay, so there are all the versions. So again, we're going to go with this version right here. I will circle it so you can see it. And it is the off the shoulders version with the straight skirt. See that? Off the shoulders with the straight skirt. All right. So now we need to determine, you need to determine what type of fabric is recommended for this dress. That is the first thing I always tell my students. That is the first thing that that you want to pay attention to. Okay, so the pattern will tell you what fabrics are recommended. Pay attention to that. If the fabric is not listed, then that basically means that this particular project is not suitable for the fabric that is not listed. Okay, so you want to make sure that you do that. Also, it also tells you right there the description of the garment. So everything you need to know about the garment is there. And I'll read this one out loud. It says, close-fitting line dresses have bodice, sleeves, and skirt variations. Create your own design with mix and match pattern pieces. So it tells you right there exactly what it is. If you don't want a close-fitting bodice, then this is not the pattern that you want to use. It's as simple as that. everything you need is right here. If you see right here, and I'll highlight it, it says suggested fabrics. See that? Right there, it says suggested fabrics right there. So in this case, I will read them for you. It says suggested fabrics: satin, taffeta, velvet, cotton blends, and for the lining, just regular lining fabric. How important is that? See that right there where it says suggested fabrics? So again, the back of the pattern jacket has a wealth of information on it. Pay attention to the information that is on there, because that will help you create a beautiful garment. Okay? So again, we're going to look for the version of the dress that we want. So I'm just going to put it down for a few minutes, and then we're going to pick the version. So for size, we're going to go for size 12. So I am going to draw a line all the way down size 12. All right, so I've drew a line all the way down to size 12. So no matter what version you would happen to go with, if you draw a line down the size, then that way you can't, you won't get it confused, okay? So I know that we're doing this straight skirt, the pencil skirt. So I'm gonna mark that off in red. We're doing the pencil skirt. And we are doing the strapless bodice. And let's see. It has the flounce on the sleeve. So let's see where that is. Flounce sleeve. All right, so I'm going to highlight these in green. I've already highlighted them with the red marker. All right, so there we go. So right there is the strapless bodice with the flounce sleeve and the straight skirt, okay? So it also tells you the yardage that you need for the width of fabric. Now, I happen to know that is also a struggle. Whenever I'm in the fabric store, I always see customers come up to the counter and say, can you tell me what the width of this is? So that is very important. If you don't know the width of the fabric, then you should ask any questions that you have. You should ask the salespeople or the young ladies at the cutting counter, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get the incorrect amount of fabric, okay? So you could get not enough or you could get too much. So knowing the width of the fabric is very important. I will add to that most fabrics now are 60 inches wide. However, dress fabrics like chiffons and things like that usually come in 45. But be sure, this is one of those things that you don't want to guess with, okay? So for this instance, I will need, we're going to say that my fabric is going to be 60 inches wide. So that said, for the bodice, I'm going to need 3/4 of a yard. Excuse me, a half a yard. See, I can't read. I'm going to need a half a yard for the bodice. And for the lining is usually 45 inches. I'm going to need 5/8 of a yard. For the flounce on the sleeve, I'm going to need 60 inches wide fabric. I'm going to need a half a yard. And the lining is 3/8. And for the skirt, I'm going to need 7/8 of a yard. And for the lining, I'm going to need 1.25 yards. So I have marked these so you can see them. don't forget your interfacing. Interfacing is very, very, very important. I know my students always say, what is interfacing? What is the purpose of the interface? And see where the red checks are? That is all the fabric lining and interfacing that I need. So typically what I do is if I'm at the fabric store, then I take a separate piece of paper and write down everything that I need, just so that I'm not confused. Okay, so it would look something like this. And I'll write it down really quickly. The bodice, it would be whatever it is. Lining, whatever it is. And so on and so forth. So I would just go down everything I need so to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything. So it would look like that. I would just make a list and just go down everything that I need. Now, another thing that you want to make sure that you get, in addition to the lining, the face fabric, the lining, and the interfacing, are your notions. So notions are down here at the bottom. And when I say notions, I'm referring to zippers, snaps, buttons, seam binding, thread. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. So you want to make sure that you check that as well, because you want to get everything you need while you're at the store. Okay, you don't want to get home and go, oh my goodness, I forgot to see right there where it says notions. You want to make sure that you get all your notions. So depending on what version you're making, the notions may vary. So in this case, you need one 22-inch invisible zipper. And for the strapless version, you need one 16-inch invisible zipper. And then you need 1.25 yards of boning, and obviously matching thread. It does not say that on there, but obviously matching thread to match the fabric for your garment. Now, what I do is I just have standard black thread on my machine. That is what I sew with, unless I'm sewing something that is, you know, like a light color, wedding gowns or things of that nature, then I have a standard white on there. The only time I change it is if I'm going to be top stitching, or at some point the stitching will be visible. That is the only time that I change it. When I'm doing hand sewing, I use invisible thread, so it doesn't matter, you know, the color of the garment. I just use invisible thread. That is just easier for me. One of the things about sewing is you will develop your own techniques. You will develop what it is that works best for you. That works best for me because I sew all day, every day. So it's easier for me to have the basic color threads. In addition to that, I have several sewing machines set up. So if I need to go back and forth with thread color, then I can do that as well. I have two sergers, one with black thread on it and one with like an off-white thread on it. So it's a whole setup, and you can actually see some of my machines behind me. But that comes with practice. Eventually, you know, if sewing is something that you're going to do or that you want to do, you really want to get into it, then eventually you'll build up these norms for yourself. I've been sewing since I was 8, so I know what works for me and what doesn't work for me. So I have a whole setup. So that said, I believe I've covered everything on the back of the pattern jacket. No, I didn't. I forgot one thing. If you look down at the bottom of the pattern jacket, which is down here, and I've enlarged it, you'll see additional measurements, such as measurements at the bust line, and I will highlight these and show them to you. and then measurements at the hip line, and then the measurements from the base of the neck down. And also what you want to keep in mind is there is also, if you see that right there, see the different measurements, I've highlighted them, and then right there it talks about with nap and without nap. Now, with nap and without nap are things that you want to keep in mind if you're sewing with one directional fabric. So one directional fabric would be something like an ombre, velvet, corduroy, some synthetic suedes, but those are mostly the ones that are directional. So when it says without nap means that you can, the fabric, there is no nap, the fabric can go any kind of way. You can lay your pattern down whatever way you want to lay your pattern down. With nap means that you have to lay all the pattern pieces in the same direction. So if you're laying your pattern pieces this way, this being the top, this being the bottom, then all of the pattern pieces have to be laid in succession. So that this would be the top on the second piece, and this would be the bottom. If for some reason you forget and you accidentally cut them in the wrong direction, in the case of velvet or corduroy, one pant leg will be lighter and one will be darker. So there is no way to correct it. You can't iron it to make it match. You have to actually recut that piece. So when you're using those directional fabrics, you have to make sure that you're adding, that you're selecting the yardage for fabric that has a nap to it. Typically you need, I would say maybe about a yard extra fabric or a yard and a half. It just depends on what you're making, but all of that information is on the back of the pattern jacket. It says with nap and without nap, the measurements. So in the asterisks, I'll show you on this one. The asterisks, see the asterisks on there? The asterisks indicate with or without nap. So that is also something that you definitely do not want to overlook. It is very important. If you are at the fabric store and you happen to see a piece of velvet or corduroy or something of that nature and you want to use for whatever pattern you're making, when you get to the cutting counter, make sure you ask. If you don't know, it's nothing wrong with asking. That's why they're there, and that will increase your knowledge level. So it can only help you. Don't be afraid to ask questions when you get to the cutting counter. If the person that is helping you doesn't know, then ask them, is there someone here that does know? I would rather you do that than purchase the fabric and then it not be the right thing for that project that you're making. Okay, so hopefully I've cleared up some questions that you may have. My name is Chris Cooper. I am the proud owner of Studio Tissue 8. Feel free to email me. You can email me at info@studiotissue8.com. If you have questions, you can call me 202-241-5060. 202-241-5060. That is my business number. You can follow me on Instagram at Studio Tissue 8. You can follow me on Facebook at Studio Tissue 8. I'm just all over the place. But more importantly, I am here to share my gift of sewing with you. Okay? Thank you and happy sewing.